We are live in Studio B. This is your day-to-day BYU sports play-by-play. I am Spencer Linton alongside a man who has Matich Monday on lockdown. Jarom Jordan speaking with one of the ESPN GOATs of college football analysis.
Yes, we always know Trevor brings it, especially on Mondays. He gives us the good stuff. It's a Matich Monday, and there was certainly a lot to talk with Trevor Matich about. Here's my conversation with Trev. All right, Trev, what an incredible weekend for Cougar football fans. Not only BYU beating Utah State and Tyler Allgeier, and amazing NFL performances from Zach Wilson, Taysom Hill looking like Christian Okoye in Tecmo Super Bowl, and then Visek Ahema housing his talk in General Conference. It was a great weekend for Cougar fans.
Fantastic weekend, and there's so much opportunity to continue to extend it. Starts with the foundation, though. BYU football won the rivalry game against Utah State with so many starters out, not only before the game coming in, but then during the game losing guys. And that was a phenomenal way to win a big rivalry game, and that is the foundation for all the other great things that happened for a BYU fan.
Tyler Allgeier goes for 218 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, if it wasn't clear that he's the MVP of the team right now, I think it was after that game, especially given the injuries at quarterback. Baylor Romney goes out of this game at halftime.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons that Jacob Conover did not have to press, because they knew they could just hand the ball to Algiere behind an offensive line that was missing 2 starters, and they'd still be able to grind out a win. And I'll tell you, Algiere, there have been times in this season where he has taken the team on his back and done things to win games. We know about that forced fumble against Arizona State. But then in this game, when the third quarterback is in, when Utah State has the momentum, the defense rose up and makes some plays. But more than that, Algiere and the banged-up offensive line went out there and took over. I think that this is really the year of the running back, Jarom, nationally, running back and tight end. But Algiere is one of those guys that makes it the year of the running back. You've got great runners at places like Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, and BYU. And none of them have anything over Tyler Allgeier. I think nationally, he is setting a tone for what people think of BYU football as tough, physical, resilient, and really fast, because Allgeier can run.
Yeah, he's really fast. I think people see the power, but yeah, the speed. I did talk to one NFL agent after the game who said he should go and he'd be a 3rd or 4th round pick. What's your assessment of that?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair, and he might even be a little higher than that, because he's shown that he can block, he's shown that he can catch, but especially he's shown that he's a big back that can run between the tackles with toughness and also get the big play. You've got a lot of big backs in the NFL that can get you those 4 or 5 yards between the tackles. But then when they break out into the open field, they'll get maybe another 15 more before somebody runs them down. Whereas Algiere can go another 30 or 40 or even to the house, depending on where the other angles are. And he's got that kind of speed. And so I think he's looking at a very, I would say this. If I'm in the NFL now and I played for 12 seasons as an offensive lineman, I would love to have exactly that kind of back for exactly that reason. He can keep us even with the chains, with the tough runs. But then there's nothing more delicious for an offensive lineman than to throw a block and to strive and strain against a 340-pound guy. And then hear the crowd roar, look up, and see the back of your running back as he's still 40 yards, 50 yards, 60 yards down the field, still running. And Tyler Allgeier can do both of those things.
60 is right. He had a 67-yard run, which is pretty incredible. Had a 68-yard touchdown last year against Boise State, 67 against Utah State. Boise State's coming up this week, which is crazy because Boise State's a 2-3 team. The 3 losses are respectable. Vegas is saying this is a 2.5-point line. And in comes big, bad, undefeated 5-0 number 10 BYU. What do you think of this matchup? Because it feels a little weird staring at 2-3 Boise State, who to me is still a very good team.
Boise State is a much tougher team than people really give them credit for. I mean, they've got those 3 losses, but they're the good teams. I mean, they went out to UCF and lost to the top offense in college football after jumping out to a 21-0 lead before the Knights really took over. They lost to Oklahoma State, who's still undefeated. This Boise State team has had some snake bit things happen to them, but it doesn't change the fact that they are very physical, very stout. And with Hank Bachmeier at quarterback, they've got a guy that has proven to be able to make plays. So fans should not just assume that BYU's 5-0, Boise State's 2-3, therefore the Cougars are going to roll. If BYU is able to win this game, it will be a quality win for the Cougars.
There's always been quarterback injuries in this matchup. Hank Bachmeier hasn't actually played against BYU. 2019 was injured, and then 2020, the second string is playing Jack Sears. He gets hurt. Cade Finnegan comes in. He's actually like the fourth string, and now Cade Finnegan's on BYU's roster. So it's a crazy situation, but it's ABC, and it's 1:30 in the afternoon, national, and it's SkyCam, and it's number 10 BYU. Trevor, I don't know what we both thought this season would be, but there's no way we thought it would be 5-0 and number 10 at this point. This has been incredible.
I think a lot of people thought that at this point, 3-2 would be good. 4-1 would be fantastic. And if you told them before the season about the injuries that they would lose their starting quarterback and then they would lose in a rivalry game their backup quarterback, and then their third string quarterback would have to come in, and who knows what the situation will be this week. If you told them that, then 5-0 would be just absolutely unheard of. And I think it speaks to the resilience of this team. It goes back to last year when they were figuring out what to do with COVID. They didn't have a conference to tell them what to do. They were the only team west of the Rockies, I believe, that were playing at one point, or at least planning to play. And so they all came together as a team and decided what they needed to do in order to keep themselves safe and in order to play the season. And I think that kind of togetherness, that kind of brotherhood has changed a lot of things around BYU from a standpoint of elevating what was already a strong culture to an even stronger culture. And I think that's one of the reasons they're able to go 5-0 against this schedule, even with the injuries that they've endured.
We're talking to ESPN's Trevor Matich, former BYU national champion. More on that point. I wonder if it took year 11 of independence, year 6 of Kalani Sitake to get to this point. Because you're exactly right. If BYU had had its starting quarterback all the way through these 5 games, we'd think, well, maybe 5-0 is possible. Maybe. No. BYU's gone to the third string already. That's crazy. And now you wonder if it kind of took that long to develop this depth that hopefully BYU will be ready for in the Big 12, where, let's be honest, every year is going to be like this year.
Yeah, and you look at specifics of it. Last year, a lot of offensive linemen had to play. And so you ended up with guys with a lot of starting experience, and that created a tremendous amount of competition coming into this season. You had to get the best out of everybody, and the backups know that they're going to have a chance to play anyway. A lot of times you'll have a backup thinking, well, I'm not going to get in the game. And it's not that then he becomes lazy. It's that there's not that sense of urgency in practice that you would have if you know you can get in there and probably will. And that was developed over the last couple of years with so much depth on the offensive line. And then Tyler Allgeier, I think they expected him to be a solid back, but I don't know that anybody expected him to be a national level elite playmaker that he has been. And so those kinds of things have all come together at exactly the right time to help BYU overcome some of the problems that they've had with injuries to make a physical statement every game in going 5-0.
And Trevor, I think it's been passed over a little bit, but let's address it. I think that what BYU has done has completely validated what happened last year. There was this sort of asterisk element to this, even from me and us kind of saying, well, it was a different schedule. BYU was good. Who knows what they would have done against the 6 P5s they played. Listen, I think last year's team would have won 10+ now that we see what this year's team has done without those guys. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that, especially with Zach Wilson at quarterback. And Jaron Hall has proved himself a worthy successor to Zach Wilson. Baylor Romney has proved himself to be a worthy successor to Zach Wilson. Zach was a cut above, and it's hard to make everybody stand next to that standard. At the same time, you're seeing efficient, effective playmaking at the quarterback position this year, and that's huge. But last year, goodness gracious, with Zach, what they could have done against that schedule, we look back on it now, I think they very well could have won 10+. They would have, I think. And I think that a lot of people believe that last year was a fluke, because when all the Power 5 teams were taken off the schedule, that it was just a bunch of Group of 5 teams and it was just lesser competition. And that's fair to a degree, although some of those teams were really strong Group of 5 teams. But at the same time, this does validate what they did last year. I think that's important for recruiting, because negative recruiters would go out there and say, yeah, well, look, BYU won a lot of games. Who'd they beat? Well, now that is taken off the table for negative recruiters, and that allows BYU to recruit an even stronger roster, especially in depth.
Yeah, look what BYU is doing, right? As an independent, what can BYU do as a Power 5 team in 2023? We're talking to Trevor Matich of ESPN. It's a Matich Monday. Does BYU need Jaron Hall to start Saturday to win? I'm assuming Baylor Romney will be out with a concussion.
Yeah, no, I think that they can still win with Conover, but they will have to be lights out on defense, and they will have to be lights out in the running game. The thing about Conover is that he's a very talented guy.
Yeah.
And people look at his quarterback rating and how he started the game against Utah State when he came in. He struggled early and then started to do a little bit more. I think that experience would help him in this game if he's the one that has to play. Keep in mind that he doesn't have to be a super playmaker. They've got great playmakers on the perimeter and in the backfield. All he has to do is know where to get the ball. And if he is the guy to start this week, he will be getting starters reps. And he will be a guy that I think has the talent to be able to distribute the ball accurately where it needs to go, as long as he doesn't freak out. And he doesn't strike me as a guy that would freak out. So is what you're asking is if Jaron Hall can't play and if Baylor Romney can't go, can BYU still win? The answer is yes, and it's not just a matter of hoping that they can win on an abstract basis. I think Conover can do enough to distribute the ball well enough for BYU's offense to still function on a efficient level, and it'll have to be very efficient because this Boise defense is pretty darn good, and I would not let people think that their 3-loss season so far suggests that they can be pushed around. They can't.
We should rewind, and I was a little dramatic in the question, to 2019. BYU started a first-time starter, third string, and beat Boise State. His name was Baylor Romney. Okay, let's finish with this. Do you think if BYU or Cincinnati go undefeated, that they would make the playoff?
I think Cincinnati has a good chance. Part of the reason that either team might have a chance is the chaos happening at the top right now, with teams like Ohio State, now Oregon, others struggling early in the season, Oklahoma not looking dominant. We'll see what happens the rest of the season, but it opens a door certainly for a fan to look at it and think, okay, well, maybe the usual suspects like Clemson, who usually has a playoff spot reserved for them every year, is now out of it. The ACC is probably out of it. So it opens doors for other teams. But you look at now, Ohio State starting to come back. The SEC has 2 absolute playoff caliber teams, at least in Alabama and Georgia, that could fill some of that gap. Cincinnati would have the edge over BYU, especially if Notre Dame now gets itself together and continues on to a very good season, because they won at Indiana and they won especially at Notre Dame. And that might be the edge that Cincinnati would need in order to stay ahead of BYU. I think that playoff or bust, it would not be a fair thing for fans to be thinking, though. I think what they need to be thinking is, hey, let's get to the New Year's Six. That's something that would be a phenomenal achievement for BYU, especially with the injuries that they've had. Now, to get there, they have a very difficult, tricky schedule still to go. And so as a fan, it's okay to make these kinds of speculations. And it's really fun to make these kinds of speculations. Could BYU make the playoff? Well, yeah, if they win out. Yeah, well, winning out against the schedule that remains is going to be hard to do. So the players and coaches are not thinking that way at all. They're thinking about the next team. They're thinking about getting ready for Boise State. But if BYU does win out or have just one loss, they have a very good chance, if not a certainty, to get into a New Year's Six bowl game. But I think Cincinnati would have the edge on them if everything broke the right way for a non-Power 5 team to make the playoff. I think the Bearcats would be the ones that would be chosen.
I'd love to at least have that conversation late in the season. That'd be incredible. Trevor, we appreciate the time as always.
Thank you, Jaron.
Again, hoping to have that conversation later. If we do, that'd be amazing. I'm not expecting BYU to go undefeated. Maybe you are. Maybe you are. I don't know. I still think there's a loss or 2 on there, but that's okay. The start's been incredible. BYU's overcome some amazing things, and this has been a really fun ride that hopefully continues.
BYU just needs to avoid a loss to Boise State, just like they delivered to Boise State in 2019.
Yes.
When the Broncos were undefeated,
yes,
they're ranked number 14. There was rain in the forecast that night, and it rained. And there's rain in the forecast this time around as well.
Saturday?
Yes.
Triple header on BYU TV.
But BYU has been, it's been like, they've been the Demon Busters this year, right? They broke the streak against Utah, handled Utah State in game number 5. They'll be okay against Boise State.
Let's go.